At 1 o'clock, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a lookout spotted masts coming over the horizon, and it was Admiral Howe bringing a fleet with reinforcements from New York. Well, D'Estaing had three choices, and I guess it's debatable which might have been the best choice. The three choices as I see it. He could have remained on station. They could have attacked as planned, but the gamble, the risk was having his fleet bottled up in Narragansett Bay by the British fleet. That's one option. Second, he could have left his infantry here. He had 1,000 regulars, 2 French regiments. He could have left them ashore to cooperate with the Americans and maybe even spared some of his Marines. He had 1,500 Marines. Go Marines. He could have left some of them here, I think, and then sortied the fleet. But he decided on the third option, which was to re-embark everybody. He had just asked them to come ashore. Now they were all asked to re-embark, everyone, every man jack of them. And the whole fleet then sortied out to engage the approaching British fleet. And it was your typical line ahead naval action. That the French had the weather gauge. They were closing distance. They got to about maybe 6 miles. They were still closing on the 10th. Sunset. The next morning, the sea got choppy. The skies got dark. The weather got forbidding. And the next thing you know, it was, as it's known to history, the Great Storm, which we believe was a hurricane, a bona fide hurricane as we would identify one today. It lasted for 2 days. It devastated both fleets. D'Estaing's own flagship, a 90-gunner, 90, can you imagine, was completely dismasted, completely, and the rudder was snapped. And it was just like a floating barge out there on the bobbing sea. And other ships were savaged by the weather. Both fleets. And the ships were scattered. And here on land, yeah, it was raining here too. And it was a miserable set of circumstances for the troops, many of those militia without tents. The weather finally broke 2 days later. The British vessels made for New York, the French vessels made for Boston. There were some ship-to-ship encounters, just random. A British ship might encounter a French ship, they'd exchange broadsides. Nothing too much occurred decisively from those actions. The Languedoc, the D'Estaing's own flagship, was set upon by a 50-gunner, the HMS Rhode, which maneuvered for a stern rake, and right about sundown, closed that distance and fired a stern rake. The cannonballs went all the way through the ship to the bow, if you can imagine. But the captain of the Renown said, well, I'm just going to wait till sunup, wait till dawn to finish her off. By sunup, however, the vessels had separated and some additional French ships had come to the rescue of the flagship, and so the Renown sailed away. What about the Americans that were left behind? Well, when the weather cleared, Sullivan he moved down closer to Newport, got on Honeyman Hill, and started digging his siege lines, siege works, and emplacing batteries. And then on the 20-something, a few days later, 20th, yes, thank you so much. On the 20th, a couple of crippled French ships limp into Newport with news. We're not coming back. We're going to Boston because our fleet is devastated, and we're going to fix it, build it back, and then head down to the Caribbean. For the French, it was always the Sugar Islands. That was the prime directive, if you will. So we're going to repair the fleet and head to the Caribbean. Fine. What about the Americans here? Well, they kept digging siege works. They opened a bombardment. It was at extreme range. You read about on this given day, 400 rounds were fired. One man was hit. There was a guy mending his shoes His wife and son were nearby. A cannonball came through the tent or barracks or whatever it was, took off his leg while he was mending his shoes. But essentially, very little damage for the amount of ordnance that was thrown in both directions. Ranges were too severe, calibers were too small for the most part, and the earthworks absorbed the solid shot pretty well. So finally, Sullivan, he gets wind that there's another group of reinforcements forming in New York, and he decides to pull chocks. Meanwhile, once it was known that the French were not coming back, the militia in particular started to go home, and so did the volunteers. There were about 1,700 volunteers here that were neither militia nor state troops nor Continentals, but they were quality units, well equipped. They started to leave too. So Sullivan's force was diminishing, depleting. He no longer had enough men even to maintain a siege, let alone attack. So on the night of the 27th, correct me if I'm wrong on that, Paul, is it the 27th or the 28th? The night of the
28th.
28th, thank you. The night of the 28th, he leaves some campfires burning and pulls his men out. General Greene, who's been mentioned, led one column up the West Road over Turkey Hill to a position west of here. General Glover, the other column up the East Road over Quaker Hill to a position basically in front of these works and to our left that way. In the morning, sentries inform General Pigot that the Americans have left. He orders a hot pursuit. He sends 1,100 British under Brigadier Smith up the East Road and about 1,000 Hessians under von Lossberg up the West Road in an attempt, he hopes, to overtake the fleeing Americans, catch them in column, destroy them in detail. But what he runs into instead is a resolute rear guard. On the East Road, about 900 Americans commanded by Livingston of New York. On the West Road, about 300 Americans commanded by John Lawrence, light infantry. And they fight a nice delaying action. The first contact, as we determined, the very first contact of all of that was on the West Road, near the Overring House, where Prescott was captured, that I told you about. Von der Malsburg, again, he and his chasseurs push aside or push back the pickets of Lawrence's light infantry, and they press and they press and they press and they drive them back all the way to Turkey Hill. There's a brief stand there. Sullivan sent in a Continental regiment to reinforce them, Webb, I think, but too many Hessians. Too many Hessians are coming, and that position is overtaken, and Lawrence falls all the way back upon Greene to our west of here. On the East Road, meanwhile, about an hour later, Smith and his column comes in contact with Livingston's men. The 22nd Foot is coming up the road, the East Road, and there's an ambush to their left flank, behind some stone walls. A 91-man picket guard of American forces jump up from cover, fire 2 quick volleys into the flank of the 22nd Foot. They cause 27% of the entire casualties suffered by the British forces and Hessian forces in this engagement occurred in that one action, that 1-2 volley ambush. 50 some odd wounded, fewer than 20 killed, 13, 16, something like that killed, 50 some odd wounded. Smith orders his men to fix bayonets and press on, and Livingston gives ground, falls all the way back to Quaker Hill.